So hi everyone, welcome to the Deis Open Roadmap meeting for the v1.12 release. We're joining you live from AWS reInvent this week. We got some exciting news to share about the Deis v2 effort for this meeting, as well as a demo we're going to be showing off of a new highly available Postgres running on Kubernetes component. So first, before we dive in, just a little quick housekeeping. The next meeting, one of the things we're going to be doing is sending out the agenda for what we're going to be covering in the session out in advance, and that'll give folks the ability to add some agenda items as necessary. But for today, feel free. Before the demo, we'll stop and open it up to participants to ask any questions. But feel free to jump in at any time in the chat or speaking up with any questions you have. And with that, we're going to get right into it. I'm going to have Chris Armstrong, Deis engineering lead, kick it off with the news about the last release.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. We shipped Deis 1.11 on Tuesday. We ship releases the first Tuesday of every month. This release, the major feature was a complete rewrite of Deis Logger. This is an effort that Kent took up on our end. It's now much easier to configure drains. Stability and extensibility were kind of key features here. The other big thing is that the logger now has an in-memory ring buffer. So for people thinking about stateless clusters, if they're running without Ceph, one thing they kind of had to give up before was application logs. That was something that people had to kind of send elsewhere and give up the fact that the Deis CLI would know how to get application logs. So we now have an in-memory ring buffer for the logger. So the most recent amount of logs, depending on how you configure logger, will be retained in memory so that the Deis CLI can fetch those. So that's pretty awesome. Then we had some housekeeping stuff for this release. Deis Builder supports submodules and build packs. Which is a few users had found some build packs that weren't fully supported by Deis. So we have that. Deis Router app whitelisting of IP addresses. Another fairly big thing, but a housekeeping chore, is we finally upgraded CoreOS to a Docker release that is free of major bugs, which is pretty exciting. Docker 1.5 had major memory leaks for some users. There were kind of a lot of issues around machines kind of running out of memory, spiraling out of control because of some memory leaks in Docker. So overall, this release is pretty stable. We're very happy with it. And those are kind of the main features of the release. There were a few challenges. Docker Registry version 2 was something that is on the roadmap, I think, for people. To give you some background, one of the other reasons that the Docker in the builder component is still held to an older Docker is that the Docker team completely rewrote the registry for version 2. So the official Docker registry, which is something that we run in Deis, was rewritten. And we have to upgrade our custom logic for that to work on top of Docker Registry v2. So that's something that Matt Boers has been working on. We wanted to get into this release, but we also want to make sure it gets done right and without issue. So that's going to slip till next release, but that's something we're looking forward to as well. And then etcd client timeouts, we're still seeing some flakiness with that in our test runs. So we have, if you go to ci.deis.io, you'll see that Jenkins is configured to do a test run anytime anyone issues a pull request against Deis. That's something we continue to see, although it's much improved. But that's something we're going to be working on. So that's this release. For next release, like I said, Docker Registry v2 is kind of at the top of the map. That'll kind of get us up to date as well. If some of our users are seeing issues with Deis pull, there are a few issues floating around with it because of like I said, the registry completely got rewritten. So the image format also changed in newer Docker versions as well. So if you're doing a Deis pull for an image that was built with a more recent Docker than the daemon that we're running in Builder, then the Deis pull would actually fail. So that's kind of top of our list to get done for the next release. etcd stability in general, we've for users who've been with us a while, etcd 0.4 had a lot of issues, and most of those have been alleviated with etcd 2. But we're going to also try So now that etcd is behaving better, we're going to reevaluate our uses of etcd in the clients and the components themselves as well. So, there's a new Go binding for etcd. We can try reevaluating using watching for key changes rather than just pull waiting with conft. So we're going to look at that. And then we're going to talk about a lot this time is we're moving a lot of the team's resources into Deis v2. So with that, I think Gabe's going to talk a little bit about what Deis 2 version 2 is. We introed it last roadmap meeting. Just kind of mentioned that that's where our heads were. But we kind of have a better idea now of what that entails. So Gabe, if you want to take that.
Sure, and we're actually gonna. I'd like to kind of jump in a little bit more into what Deis v2 means and how that's going to kind of affect the near-term roadmap. But before I do that, we obviously have a ton of folks running in production today on the kind of the v1 line, and I want to talk a little bit about how we plan to address kind of ongoing work on the v1 line, because it's certainly not something that's going to go away anytime soon. So for that, I'd like to actually hand it over to Matt Boersma, on the core team, to talk about some of the forward stability efforts on the v1 line. Matt?
Yeah. Hey, I'm Matt Boersma. I also help lead the core development team with Matt Butcher, and I try and help out with the new engines and boxcars and cabooses, but the real thing I do is try to keep the current trains running on time. So we're all pretty pumped about Kubernetes and Deis version 2. But the reason we're all here in this meeting is because the current version works and we have to keep it running and solving real problems. So that's essentially my task. Like Gabe said, we're not going to be adding significant features to the current version 1 platform of Deis, if you want to call it that. But we're definitely going to make sure it continues to keep getting better. We're going to be aggressively fixing bugs. We're going to be streamlining the code. We're going to be supporting all the workloads that you have as long as you need us to. So version 1 continues. Specifically what we've done, like we mentioned, we're back on CoreOS stable finally, which is a better place for us. We're not down rev with regards to Docker CoreOS. Chris mentioned we have a bunch of custom code that interacts with Docker registry. We also have a custom version of Docker registry that does direct registry to registry transfer. Throwing all that away and just using Docker directly, which will be slightly less efficient, although I don't think people will notice. But basically, it frees us of having to maintain and rewrite legacy code, stuff that's immediately legacy code, because Docker can change this immediately on us. We're also going to hopefully upgrade Logspout and get off of sort of our custom code to the publicly available version 3 of Logspout, assuming we can make a release for that. We're going to move to Docker distribution registry version 2. We're going to upgrade to Alpine 3.2 because there's some as the base image for all the Docker images. So basically, Deis will work with any Docker version, which you might know isn't the case right now. And getting rid of legacy code will really help us future-proof everything. So there's 2 PRs relevant to this out there right now, 4581 and 4580. So if you have any time to go check out this work in progress, this is what's going to land for 1.12. And I'd really appreciate any feedback anyone has. And that's it.
All right, great. Thanks, Matt. Obviously, just to reiterate again, the 1x code line, it's hard to know exactly how long we're going to have it out there, but suffice to say, we're not even considering yet, sort of a EOL policy for that. We obviously need to get, Deis v2 out there and, much more stable before we can even start having that discussion. So big, ongoing effort on the team for that. But I do want to talk about, some of the exciting stuff that we have planned coming up for Deis v2. So let me just stop at this point and just kind of take a step back and for those of you who maybe haven't heard about Deis v2, talk a little bit about kind of what some of the goals are for this. So there's really 2 ways to think about the Deis v2. So the first and sort of the simplest way to think about it is everything that you know and love about Deis v1 sitting on top of Kubernetes instead of Fleet. That's sort of the simplest explanation, is just taking the existing components, porting them over. There's some changes, so some things that, you want to start leveraging Kubernetes for, specifically around, the nice service discovery and, for things like the router. And, so some components are going to have to change as part of the nature of this port. But by and large, the API surface is going to stay the same. Certainly from the standpoint of consumers, it's going to look and feel the same. Feel the same. It's just going to be a lot more stable because Kubernetes has proven to be a lot more stable foundation, as we found out after many months of the scheduler previews kind of being out in the wild. So so that's kind of the primary way to look at this, is current Deis on top of Kubernetes. But there's also another way to look at this, and this is actually really exciting to me. And the real goal, I think, going forward is for Deis to be even more modular than it is today. So I know a lot of people are attracted to Deis because it facilitates very easy customization compared to many of the other sort of platform offerings on the market. So a lot of people will swap out Ceph or for S3 or and a lot of folks are reusing our components. Our logging subsystem, I know, is being reused in other projects. Ceph subsystem is being used in other projects. And so it's been sort of, a series of very customizable building blocks. But we actually want to go completely in the modular direction where, folks are able to use things like our database running on top of Kubernetes completely outside the context of Deis. And if you think about it, there is actually some sort of some non-ideal coupling between some of the components. They are pretty well segmented, but we can always do better with regard to removing that coupling. And that's going to be one of the major design goals for Deis v2 is something extremely modular. So with that kind of a frame, I'd like to hand it over to Matt Butcher, who's leading the effort here on Deis v2 to talk about where we're at with it and how you can follow along and also how you can help. So Matt, take it away.
Yep. Great. I'm going to, in a moment, attempt to bravely show a slide on the screen share feature. We'll see how that goes. But I wanted to introduce a couple things first. The first one is internally, when we first started this project, we began drafting a design document for how we might want to build this, the Deis v2 platform. And it's gone through a number of iterations, and it's time, I think, for us to make that public and get a lot of feedback on that. It initially started in a very rough state, but now I feel like I've kind of massaged it to the point where I'm feeling less like it's my baby that I need to take care of and shelter, and more like this is really something the community as a whole should be participating in. So I'm going to go ahead and release that later on today, and you'll be able to get to it from GitHub. So that should be coming along. It's big. So I decided to try and summarize it on a slide. So here's what we got. All right, so that is, this slide is trying to capture really the way we're going to go with things. We are going to start breaking things down into separate repositories on GitHub. So we've got the big repository, right, which is GitHub Deis/Deis. That's the big components column over on the right side. And we're going to start focusing, we're going to refer to this sort of conveniently as the Deis workflow segment, the Deis workflow project. It'll stay Deis. And that's going to still keep some of the major components inside of it, right? The router will still be inside of it, the controller will still be inside of it, and the Deis CLI will still be inside of it. And then what we're going to try and do is start breaking down some of the other components into individual standalone repos that have fewer dependencies or, sort of ideally no dependencies. And the first few that we're going to roll out are etcd and an HA version of Postgres. So these are sort of foundational elements, and we want to get them out right away and get people contributing to them right away. So etcd, for example, will work by standing up both a discovery service and an etcd cluster inside of Kubernetes. So it'll be more self-contained than what we currently have. And we'll be releasing that Git repo. Basically, if you've got Kubernetes running, you should be able to deploy this etcd cluster into it. Then building on top of the etcd cluster will be the Postgres project, and it'll use etcd for some of its service coordination. You're going to get to see a demo of it in a little while when Matt Fisher, Bacon Gobbler, shows it off. But those will be sort of our first two as we test the water with how we can break down the existing Deis platform into a number of standalone, more microservice-y components. And then we've got slated several others we want to do this way. We want to provide an object storage backend, S3 compatible, that you'll be able to use, or if you opt out of that, a path to very simply continue using Amazon S3 or OpenStack Swift or Google's object storage or any of those. And then we also are really going to take an earnest shot at doing the same thing with Builder, which is really a core PaaS component, and see if we can have that stand alone. Oh yeah, I see the spell check has managed to catch etcd there. Good catch there. And registry as well will go this route. And we're experimenting now and really trying to think hard about how we should handle authentication and authorization for these sort of microservices inside of the Kubernetes world. And so that's one we've got slated for an individual component as well. One of the big things with Kubernetes that we're exploring is how we're going to deal with logging. You know, we feel like we've had a pretty good logging experience in Deis v1. Kubernetes' view of logs is slightly different than what we've had in the past. And so we're looking at ways where we can explore the best of breed logging that'll take advantage of what Kubernetes offers, but also give us something else to work with, right? So that's where we're going with the V2 roadmap. In the next couple of weeks, you should start seeing some new Deis repos show up in GitHub. The etcd and Postgres ones will lead the way. And what we are really hoping for is that at this point, we just want to get these projects up to the point where we feel like one developer can sort of stand them up and get them running, and then we can open them up and start getting more community participation, because we've recognized the reason Deis is growing the way it is. Like a great example is the way Logger in 1.11 works. Tons of community interaction got it to where it is. We got an initial commit for ring buffer, and that turned into a logging rewrite that now we feel is a huge improvement. We're taking the same approach with these microservices that we hope that we can release early, get a lot of feedback, get a lot of comments, get some issues, and get some pull requests, and make some really mature solutions so that by the time Deis v2 gets released, all the individual components will be well tested and ready for prime time. So that's what I got. Looking forward to getting this design document out, and I'll post that in GitHub so you'll be able to take a look at it and give it some feedback. All right, Gabe, back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. Really excited to see that design doc out in the wild, and excited about the work in general, and for it to the community to be able to start seeing some of the great stuff that we've been doing behind the scenes so far. So, before we jump into the demo, which is really up next, I'd like to kind of pause and see if folks have any questions that they'd like answered specifically with regard to the V1 and V2 work. All right. Well, hopefully that means it's all pretty clear to folks. One of the things that we're not going to be doing today is we're not going to do a traditional sort of overview of the roadmap features that are on there because as is hopefully clear at this point, the effort is at this point not towards feature dev, which is really all that's left on the roadmap at this point, and now more towards sort of a general improvement in stability, scalability, and everything that Kubernetes is going to provide us in terms of a solid foundation going forward. So great. Look forward to hearing your comments on some of the V2 work, and I'd love to hand it over to Matt Fisher, aka Bacon Gobbler, to show off one of the first pieces of the new Deis V2 world.
Hey guys. So as Matt Butcher had mentioned earlier, I'm part of the upstream team working on the stuff for V2. One of the main components that we've been working on for V2 has been the Postgres database. For V1, we found that there was a couple of small issues with it where it's from a different approach. So for V1's Postgres, it was highly available. The data was always there if it was destroyed and recreated. But it wasn't very fault tolerant, where if the database went down, it would take about a half hour or so for sometimes to replay logs from Ceph. Or from S3 if you configured it that way. So while it was fault tolerant and it was able to recover nicely from its data, it sometimes had quite a bit of downtime if it did fail. With V2, we want to address that where we have fault tolerance, but we also get high availability. So Kubernetes gives us a really good way to do this, and it's actually quite simple to do this. I'll be posting this as a repository later on that's basically standalone away from the Deis project, that you can basically stand up your own highly available Postgres database without any reliance on anything Deis specific. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, if I can figure out how to do that. Oh, there's a share screen button. Gotcha. All right. So let me show off where this is. So I've got a cluster going on over here. If I go into kubectl, get nodes, I just have a vagrant instance of just one Kubernetes, one master and one minion. And so it just shows that I have one minion node available. If I just go get pods, I've deployed onto it a replication controller. And this is basically, if people are unaware of how Kubernetes works, a replication controller is basically how you define a component inside of Kubernetes, where basically it will handle a certain amount of replicas of a certain image or Docker image, and it will ensure that there's at least X number of replicas. So I've set up 2 here for this, and it's just the Deis database. It's what you've known. It's just Postgres that's running inside Deis, and it's communicating to an external etcd cluster here. And that's basically how it will work in V2, is that it will communicate with an etcd cluster to determine who is master, and everything else is a slave. So that the slaves will be, they'll basically become streaming replication slaves from the master, but only one of them will serve requests. So basically you get a bunch of instances that are ready on hot standby, and then one is completely ready for taking requests. So if I go actually into the master, which is the one that's currently ready, so we're actually inside the Postgres database. If we look, there's nothing inside of here. So let's just quickly create a database in here, just for explanation or just for demonstration. And then if we do another one, we've now got a foo database inside of here. And if we quit out of there, basically what's happening now is that the second database, since it's set up with replication streaming, I think this will work. You can't really see it because of SSH cutting off part of the screen, but what's basically going on here is it's running Postgres, and then it's got a bunch of Xlog streaming replication occurring, which is taking from the master. So if we actually ran into this one, and we should be able to get the foo database in here. So we're on the extra instance, it's been streamed over, and the data is in there. Now what happens if we kill off one of the nodes? So let's say we kill off the master, just to show the logs, or it's Kubernetes kubectl logs master. We'll see that it just has, it's the leader with the lock, and it has a, it's the lock owner. But if we kill it off, and then we go like that, the replication controller from Kubernetes will create a brand new database instance. So you see that PI6E6 was killed off, and WV1HW was the one, oh, that's the old one. 5R499 is the new one that was created by the replication controller. That one we can actually take a look at and see what's going on, but it's basically, it's coming back up. The leader is being re-elected, which is this one right here. This used to be a slave, but now it's basically, it'll take a bit of time for it to come up, but eventually it'll say that it's no longer a slave, and then it's now actually becoming the master. Yeah, I'm now the leader with a lock. So now it's taken over as the master, and within 30 seconds of switching over from the slave to the master, and now we can still go back into that one. and we still got all our data available. So that is my demo.
Awesome stuff, Fisher. Super exciting to see this work, coming along. Really having the data plane, or sorry, the sort of the data services in the platform feature this true high availability, as well as sort of a DR. Policy is going to facilitate lots of different things like, zero downtime update to the platform itself, in ways that we just couldn't do with the type of failover times that we have on V1 today. So this is really blazing the trail for a lot of really interesting operational hardening that we can do going forward. So super excited to see this kind of foundational piece, and also excited that other folks are hopefully going to be able to use this work outside of the Deis project. So, that's all we had today. I'd like to open it up if anyone has any questions or comments or anything like that before we close it out. All right. Well, thanks for joining, everyone. I look forward to seeing you at the next roadmap meeting, same time next month. And look forward to speaking to you then. Bye, everyone.